One Came Home, virtually presented by Mackenzie Hackett. Quote, "Don't misunderstand me. A funeral is a funeral. Though my sister wasn't in that pine box, a body lay in it, sure enough. Remember, I told myself many times during the Reverend's eulogy, and then as people started shoveling dirt into the hole, that confined body is dead. There's no forwards or backwards from dead. It doesn't make that body your sister, but it is sad, sad news." I chose this quote for the story because it shows how the main character is feeling about the death of her sister, and it sets up the whole plot of the story to come. Summary. 13-year-old Georgie Birkenhardt of Placid, Wisconsin knew that the girl in her sister's ball gown was not her biological sibling. Agatha wasn't dead. She couldn't be. Her sister was out there somewhere. She could just feel it. If only Grandfather Bolt and the sheriff believed her. Stubbornly determined to prove her sister is still alive, Georgie sets off for Dog Hollow, where her sister was last seen, to find where she disappeared. Grudgingly, she accepts having Billy McCabe, Agatha's old flame, as a traveling companion, as he insists on helping her get home safely. But following her sister's trail becomes harder than she expects, with false leads, wild animals, weather, and dangerous foes working against her. Perhaps with Billy McCabe's help and Georgie's sharpshooting skills, they will finally understand what happened to Agatha. But can they even hope to uncover the truth behind her sister's disappearance when so much remains unknown? Georgie grapples with confronting her feelings for Billy and tries to push down the guilt she feels for causing her sister's death. What secrets are Georgie's family keeping from her? Can she uncover the truth behind why her sister left and then a dead body was found? Could her sister be dead after all? Accompany Georgie and her donkey Longears on the quest to unlock the truth about what happened to the girl in her sister's dress. Setting. The time is in 1871, and the place is in Wisconsin mainly, and it takes place in the small town of Placid, Wisconsin, Dog Hollow, Wisconsin, the Garrow's Farm, which is within Dog Hollow, and Georgie's family's general store, which is in Placid, Wisconsin, and finally the Placid Cemetery, where the bodies are buried. Social conditions. In 1871, there was no FBI or real police force, or like newer ways of identifying a body beyond clothing and the hair and the way they looked. Sheriffs and other officials, such as deputies, tracked criminals to find missing people and murder people. Women's education wasn't really supported at that time, so people didn't think it was that important for women to be educated. There was no transportation beyond horse and buggy at that time period, and the media was spread through the newspaper mainly. And a big thing in this time period was passenger pigeons, and they nested, and when they nested, they brought a lot of economic wealth to wherever they nested. And when they did this, they brought in much profit for their feathers and meat and eggs and other things. The mood in the story can be suspenseful, humorous, and mysterious at all different times throughout the book. Characters. First is Georgie Birkenhardt, and she's a 13-year-old spirited girl who stubbornly refuses to believe her sister's dead. Georgie exhibits throughout the story these characters, including courage, fierceness, wit, intelligence, and independence. She is an expert sharpshooter and is strong-willed. At times she is unsure of herself and her emotions. She's the sister of Agatha Birkenhardt, who went missing and then was supposedly murdered. She's round. She shows us a wide range of emotions as she struggles to grasp how she feels about her sister's death and disappearance. And she's also dynamic because her viewpoints and her character matures and changes throughout the story. Agatha Birkenhardt, she's Georgie's older 18-year-old sister, and she's very smart but feels trapped in the small town of Placid. And she wants to go to a university to study, but without permission or help from her family, she's forced to consider marriage instead. And after making a terrible mistake, she ends up fleeing Placid, and her body is found a few days later in Dog Hollow. Agatha is round because in Georgie's mind and memories, she has many different emotions, but she's flat because she doesn't develop after her death. Grandfather Bolt, he's Agatha and Georgie's grandpa, and he runs the family general store in Placid. He's very strict in his ways, and he doesn't believe Agatha should go to school or women in general should be educated. And he believes that they should get married like women of that time, and he, after Agatha dies, doesn't believe that she could possibly be alive. He's static and flat, he doesn't change in his emotions, and doesn't really develop. Ma, she's Georgie and Agatha's mom, and she helps run the general store. She believes Agatha is dead, and she loves her family, and her husband left her years ago, so she raised the girls as a single mother. She's a very strong person in general, and she's flat and static. She shows a small range of emotion and doesn't change. Sheriff McCabe is Billy's dad, and he's the sheriff of Placid, Wisconsin. He brings the body of Agatha back to Placid, and he believes Agatha was murdered. He develops feelings for Georgie's mom eventually throughout the story. Characters continued. Billy McCabe, he's the sheriff's son, and he's 19. He was engaged to Agatha. He then gets engaged to Polly after Agatha dies, but still harbors feelings for Agatha, and he thinks she's dead, but decides to protect Georgie and shelter her from that truth because he wants her to discover it for herself. He exhibits bravery, kindness, and loyalty throughout the story, and he's round as he shows a broad range of emotions and dynamic because he does change throughout the story. Benjamin Olmsted, he's 35 years old, and he was also engaged to Agatha. He was engaged after Billy and Agatha were engaged, and he broke off their engagement when Georgie told him something about her sister. She saw Agatha do something, and she ended up telling Mr. Olmsted. Mr. Olmsted himself is kind, caring, and shows a lot of honesty and hospitality even after he's hurt by Agatha. And he's flat and static. He doesn't really change throughout the story at all. Mr. Garrow, he's a farmer who Georgie and Billy meet, and he seems to know more about Agatha than what he's letting on, and he doesn't really tell them anything. He exhibits hostility, greed, and danger. He kind of represents a foe in the story for both the characters, and he's flat and static because he doesn't change. Mrs. Garrow is married to Mr. Garrow and seems nice. She's a hardworking woman and recently had a daughter get married, and that daughter eloped. So she likes Georgie but doesn't tell Georgie anything. She is suspicious of both Georgie and Billy, and she also seems nervous around them. She is flat and static as well. Long Ears is Georgie's mule who she rides on the journey, and at first they don't really get along. He's stubborn and kind of refuses to listen to Georgie, but manages to keep her safe throughout the story, and he has a really big taste for sugar cubes. Conflict. There are different types of conflict in the story. The first is man versus man, and this is external conflict. Georgie versus Mr. Garrow, he and her kind of struggle to get against each other, and Georgie's trying to figure out what he's not telling them. Georgie versus Billy. Billy's trying to get Georgie to recognize the fact that Agatha has died, but Georgie doesn't want to believe it, and he's trying to get Georgie to go back home as well. Agatha versus Georgie. Agatha and Georgie don't always see eye to eye. Agatha wants to leave, and Georgie can't understand why her sister would want to leave her. Agatha versus family. Agatha wants to go and study and be educated, but her family disagrees with that, especially her grandfather, who doesn't want her to go and study. Billy versus Mr. Olmsted. Billy loved Agatha and was jealous of Mr. Olmsted, so he ends up doing something in the story about that, but I'm not going to give it away. Georgie versus sister's killer. She wants to figure out who murdered her sister, and she'll do whatever she has to in order to figure that out. Georgie versus Long Ears. The two, her mule and her, kind of struggle to get along and work together, but in the end they end up growing closer. Man versus self. This is internal conflict, and it's Georgie versus her feelings about her sister and trying to figure out how she feels about Billy and what happened. Billy versus his feelings. He struggles to commit to loving Polly when he loved Agatha, and he doesn't want to hurt Georgie's feelings either. And Agatha versus her feelings. She wants to stay with her family and she doesn't want to hurt her sister, but she does want to find an education for herself. And finally, man versus nature. It's Georgie and Billy versus the rain, which is just weather that happens throughout the story. Georgie versus the passenger pigeons, which nest in their hometown of Placid, Wisconsin, and she's to deal with the aftermath of them nesting, such as their feathers and nests and everything like that. And Georgie versus a mountain lion, which she meets while she's traveling. The theme of the story. I think the theme is we can't understand everything, but the definition of faith is to believe without having proof. I kind of chose this quote or theme because it encompasses what Georgie feels in the story. She has a feeling that her sister, is alive, and she follows her heart to try and find her sister. And it's difficult for her to have faith without any proof. So more evidence is displacing the fact that Agatha is dead than actually reinforcing that Agatha could be alive. Georgie feels like her sister is alive even though she doesn't have proof. Why you should read this book. This book is a different type of book than what I normally read personally. The genre is historical fiction, mystery, and adventure. It has many plot twists and makes for a very interesting story that will hopefully keep readers captivated. It's an easy read and a shorter book. The characters and plot are developed nicely, and it's a fresh change from a longer book series if you're looking for something new and different. It was a book in the Battle of the Books this year, but I actually continued to read it even after the Battle of the Books ended because I was so interested in it. About the author. The author is Amy Timberlake, and her books include One Came Home, That Girl Lucy Moon, and The Dirty Cowboy. She's won awards for all 3 books, including the Newbery Honor Award for One Came Home, the Edgar Award, and the Parents' Gold Choice Medal. Her biography: she grew up in Hudson, Wisconsin, but moved to Chicago when she grew up. She's married and still lives in Chicago this day and is continuing to write.